Oh, hello, my name is Phil Alvarez. I'm a retired Suffolk County detective, Suffolk County, New York on Long Island. I'm also the older brother of Detective Alvarez, NYPD bomb squad, who fought for the 9/11 Victims Compensation Fund bill, which takes care of our first responders, our residents, our students, those that work in downtown Manhattan on that fateful day of 9/11/2001. On that day, I was working. I was a police detective. When I got word to my family that what was going on, planes had hit the towers. A second plane had hit the towers. And the word I got from my family was that my little brother was being sent down there, as were many first responders from the FDNY, from the Port Authority Police Department, from the NYPD. It was a little weird to hear that my little brother was going down there, especially when we heard that the towers were falling and people were jumping to keep from dying a horrible death. It was a strange day. My children were in school. I spoke to my parents, spoke to my wife. Immediately after the towers fell, a mutual aid call was made by the FDNY, by the NYPD, to area fire departments, police departments. I wanted to go. Unfortunately, the police department were only sending limited amount of personnel, which included heavy rescue, canine, emergency service units. I was with the investigative command in the narcotics section, and they didn't want narcotics personnel going at that time, so I did not go. I waited to hear word from my brother, as did many guys I worked with that had brothers or family members, fathers, sisters that were down there, either as a first responder or a resident. It was a day in the history of this country where the United States of America were brought down to their knees, basically. And it was these men and women, many who are inscribed on the wall behind me. I think it's important, as we approach the 20th anniversary of these attacks on our city, that we remember the men and women that didn't hesitate to come to the aid of this city and this country, many of who are inscribed on this wall behind me. I think it's important to remember how we came together as a city and as a nation, all colors, all creeds, all ages. No matter who we were, we came together and we worked together to bring this country back from that fateful day 20 years ago. I think that message is more important today than ever as we struggle as a nation, and we need to come together to raise ourselves up. I hope that you remember my brother. I hope you remember everyone who perished on that day and the many who have perished since that day of ongoing 9/11 health conditions, cancers, physical conditions, mental conditions. I ask you that you pray for them and you remember them and honor them, because it was them that came together for us. Thank you for having me on your show.
Lou Alvarez was the face that we saw, that Jon Stewart was so angry trying to testify, having Lou testify before a Senate committee that basically was not there, days before his death from cancer, after 60 chemo treatments, he went to Washington to try to get past permanent compensation for those ailing from 9/11 illnesses. Up to 400,000 people are at risk of getting those illnesses, not just first responders like the late Lou Alvarez, but people who worked in the area, people who lived in the area, people who were in the offices. But that was the face that got that bill passed, and it was named in part for Lou Alvarez. So I'm sure now me talking about it, you are remembering, because it was so painful to look at Lou's face. You knew this man was dying. You knew this man did not have much time left. And you knew instead of spending this time with his family, he was appealing to Congress to do the right thing. Now, let's go back to that day, Phil. When did you hear from him? Because I'm sure you were concerned. Is he okay? At what point did you hear from him, and how was the family dealing with all this, knowing the horror of what was unfolding in Lower Manhattan?
It was a difficult time, because knowing that my brother was responding was a little tough, but I knew it was his job, and I knew that nothing was going to keep him from doing his job. I prayed for all those that had families in the buildings. I prayed for all the first responders that we witnessed on live television going into those buildings and being outside of them. For me, I always thought and felt that my brother would be all right. And unfortunately, it took 15 years for the fate of that day to catch up to him. It was a very stoic moment for us, to be watching this horrible day unfold as we tried to go about our daily life of waking up and going to work and having our kids go to school. And it would be well into the middle of the day before anybody in our family realized how horrible of a situation it was that my brother was going into. I guess in a way, I trusted him. I trusted his training as both as a Marine and as a police officer. And I trusted that the good Lord would take care of him and have him be able to perform his duty and be there for New York. And he was.
At what point in the day did you hear from him and you knew he was okay?
We didn't hear from my brother for a couple of days, but I personally didn't hear from him for a couple of days, but he did reach out to his wife and to my mother to let them know he was all right. But I didn't get to talk to him for a couple of days, but I knew he was okay.
And after talking to him for the first time, what did he tell you about what he saw and he was experiencing?
Lou was very quiet kind of guy. We were the two police officers in the family, and when we did talk about police work, it was just common conversation about the jobs that we did. He never mentioned, for many, many, many years, he never mentioned what he witnessed on that day and then the 3 months following. He never talked about it a lot. He never mentioned it a lot. That was his style. And it wasn't until he realized towards the end of his life that he had to say something, that he had to lend his voice to help others. Once again, that I first learned of some of his time down there and some of his feelings down there. And of course, it's the famous line that even if they told us the air was bad, we would have still gone because we knew that was our job. He said that towards the end of his life.
Phil, can you share some of the things he said when he other than that, when he finally started talking about that day?
My brother said that they knew what they were in for as soon as they got down there. They knew everybody that was down there that was a first responder knew how bad of a situation it was. But they also knew that they had to be there. Lou said he needed to be there. It was the mission. It was the mission of bringing closure to families. It was the mission of trying to help get the answers. It was his mission as an NYPD detective to help in the investigation and just search for the families. They knew right away that there wasn't going to be too many survivors of this horrific event. But they also knew that there was a lot of families waiting for them to find loved ones. Lou was honored to do that. He wanted people to be taken care of. He wanted especially the families of those we lost to be taken care of. And that was his motivation for being that. He mentioned how bad it was, the air, the dust, how they all knew that they were breathing in some bad stuff. But he knew that's what he had to do. And he always said, and he told me, I said, would you do it again, Lou? And he said, yeah, in a minute. He said he's been to a lot of places in this world and he's seen a lot of things, but there was no other place that he wanted to be with and at that moment in this nation's history, to be able to lend his hand and do his job and complete a mission for both the city and for the loved ones of those we lost. I think he took that personally, and he took that to the day he died. He wanted to find the first responders. He wanted to make sure they were taken care of.
Tell us what it was like, Phil. You went with your late brother Lou to Washington a number of times. You joined him. Tell us what it was like for him, how difficult it was, and what he was experiencing and what you were watching him experience.
So my brother asked me to drive him down to Washington, D.C. for the committee hearing, the House committee hearing on the Victims' Compensation Fund bill. He felt, even though he wasn't feeling well, he felt it was very important for him to be there and lend his voice to something that he believed wholeheartedly, and he was living it. He was living it with his family. He had gotten sick. He had been fighting cancer for 3 years, and the Victims' Compensation Fund allowed him to just concentrate on getting better. And he felt it was so important to be down in Washington, D.C. And I was, today I think about it, it was a blessing that I was able to spend that time and that he asked me to drive him down there. I had been down to Washington many times after he passed, as I was invited to the Congressional vote and the Senate vote. But as I think about it, the best was just sitting behind my brother and Jon Stewart next to John Phil and taking in that moment when he testified. He had been very nervous going in. We had been in a small room on the side, getting ready and prepping and talking about, who was going to be at the meeting, what Congress people were going to be present. And he was unfolding his speech and folding it back up and looking over. This wasn't his type of setting.
as I said before, my brother was a very under the radar type of guy. He didn't make a lot of noise. You were either going to listen to something very serious or you were going to laugh, because that's the only time he opened up his mouth to say something funny or say something that was very important to him. He didn't mince his words, and he didn't waste his words. As he read the speech, I realized the seriousness and the intent that everybody was listening to him at. And I said, wow, this is a moment. And sure enough, when he finished speaking and he received the standing ovation, including myself, as soon as somebody got up, I was right behind them. I didn't know if it was appropriate. And I heard that generally it's not. It's the first time somebody told me that works there that it's the first time he had seen a standing ovation at a committee hearing. My brother turned around to me and looked me in the face with this perplexed look on his face and say, why is everybody clapping? He didn't understand what he had just done. And I told him, because you just hit it out of the ballpark, brother. And sure enough, that was only the beginning, because as soon as we all sat down, then Jon Stewart started with his famous speech. And it was just a beautiful moment to be able to share it, not only with my brother, but with the history of what was happening for 9/11 victims and first responders. And it's a moment I'll never forget. Leaving Washington, D.C., we had given our cell phones over to security when we entered the house. We weren't allowed to have them with us. So there were some pictures taken, a couple of interviews within the room, but as we left the room, and I needed to get him back to New York because the next day he was scheduled to go to Memorial Sloan Kettering for his 69th treatment, his 69th chemo treatment. So he didn't want to miss that. He wanted to come home. So we had a 5-hour drive back. So I tried to get him out of the building as quickly as I could, and we got into our car and headed back. And we didn't think to turn on cell phones. So it was a little bit before we turned on our cell phones, and all of a sudden it started going crazy, especially about an hour into the trip when the New York media had started reporting on it. We had no idea. He had no idea. He had no idea of the impact that that speech gave at that time. It was only on that ride home. It was just me and him. And then his wife called and said there was a reporter at the door. And I started getting Facebook posts and messages. We just saw your brother on TV. And I said to him, you're going to be pretty famous by the time we get back to New York. And he said, yeah, right. And he laughed about it. And we still had no idea of the impact that that day and that moment made for the life of Lou Alvarez and for the life of the first responders. Looking back, it was quite a blessing, and a lot of people tell me and tell our family, sorry for your loss, and we thank everybody for being there for us. But how fortunate and how much of a blessing to have somebody you love get to the end of their life and decide that there's something important that means a lot to a lot of people, worth talking about. And you have the whole world just stop what they're doing and listen to them. That was a blessing, and that consoles our loss, because he was able to do that at the end. It was his moment to shine, and he shone. And it continues. It's a legacy that will continue. He said the legacy he wanted was to show his 3 boys that when you start something that is important to you, you do everything you can to finish that. And he certainly did. And we promised him when he was in hospice that he was still very interested in what was going on in Washington. He had me making phone calls and finding out how we felt the vote was going to go. And he sent the note to Mitch McConnell along with his detective badge. That was a few days before he died from the hospice, because we knew and we had gotten word that Congress was going to pass and it was be going to the Senate vote where Mitch McConnell was the majority leader. So he actually, from hospice, wrote out a note to Mitch McConnell and sent that. There was a bunch of his brothers from the Feel Good Foundation that were going to Washington to speak to Mitch McConnell about the vote. And he sent his badge in on the copy of his speech from the House committee meeting, and he wrote him a personal note to do the right thing. That would be his last. He would give a couple of interviews on major networks, and that would be his last words, just to make sure that the bill got signed. He felt that why should a family suffer because of when they got sick? He knew that this would continue. He knew that people getting sick from the toxins that they were exposed to down at Ground Zero and downtown Manhattan and at the Pentagon, he knew that it would continue to make people sick. And he wanted to do his part to make sure that the federal government passed a bill to be able to take care of those people and their families so they can concentrate on fighting the good fight. As you well are aware, Shelley, of when people get sick, they need to have their mind at a good place and be able to be comfortable and just concentrate on what doctors are saying and be able to understand and not have to worry about how they're going to pay the bills and how they're going to afford the treatments and everything else. My brother felt that was so important. It gave him the peace of mind.
How many days after his testimony did he die?
It was approximately 11 days. 12 days. We got him to Sloan Kettering. My sister got him there the next day, and he wasn't doing well. They were only able to give him half of his treatment, and they sent him home. And then the next morning, I got a frantic phone call, and we with the help of and his brothers from the NYPD, we had to rush him back to Sloan. And it was, we got the news that his liver had shut down. But we were blessed to have him very lucid at the end. I would say probably 10 or 11 of the 12 days after that. He was very comfortable. He was very lucid. We watched the New York Yankees beat up on the Boston Red Sox for a couple of days. He ordered some pizza from a place in Brooklyn that he remembered from his time as a police officer. So his partner brought up a couple of pies up. He ordered milkshakes. He was at peace. He was at peace. We promised him we would follow up, and thank God I've had an opportunity. I was a police detective for 32 years, and I retired last January to spend a little time with him and be able to go down to Washington. And also I had 32 years on, so it was time. And because of everything that happened, I've been offered a position as a director of 9/11 outreach and education for one of the major law firms that handles 9/11 victims out in Long Island, Hanson and Rosasco. And every day I get to talk to my brother, because every day I'm here talking to first responders, and I'm talking to victims, and I'm talking to students, and I'm talking to people that work down there. And every day we're getting them set up to be able to get them compensation, get them coverage in the World Trade Center health program so they have the medical coverage, get their illnesses certified. And, it's been a blessing. What a difference a year makes. It was June 29th, we lost him of 2019. So Just a couple of weeks ago was 1 year anniversary. And of course, there's a lot of anniversaries coming up as to when the bill was signed on July 29th, the time we spent down in Washington, and of course, the 20th anniversary on 9/11. So, he's always in my thoughts. And because of his legacy, I get to continue some of his work, which I'm very proud to do.
Can you tell us about your last conversation with him?
I always promised him one promise I made to him. My sister took him for most of his chemo treatments, and after I retired, I joined them, and the three of us would go into Sloan Kettering once every 2 weeks. And I made him a promise that I would never tell him what to do or what he should continue or not continue to do. I did promise him that I would tell him when I thought he had had enough, or when I thought that he should just be comfortable. And that was one of the last conversations we had. I helped him into the bathroom at the hospital, at the hospice. And actually, it was at the hospital right before we went into hospice. And I said to him, brother, this is going south on us. And he goes, yeah, I know. I said, I'm real proud of you. He said, thank you. And he said, I'm at peace. He was a man of very little words. Almost to the very end, he was comfortable, at peace, making jokes. Jon Stewart came into the hospice, and while he was in the bathroom, he imitated a nurse with an accent bringing his food and telling him to hurry up and get out of there because he had to eat his food. And when he opened the bedroom door, they shared a nice hug. That was a nice moment. And my parents and my brother and my sister were there with him. His boys came up. His wife came up. All his nieces and nephews. So he wasn't alone for 1 minute in 12 days. We had people sleeping there with him. We were doing 12, 14 hours there, and he was fine. He didn't like to be fussed over, so he would watch his Yankee games and tell me to bring up the paper and tell my other brother to bring up a shake. And we were blessed to have those moments together.
We were blessed that Lou Alvarez was Lou Alvarez and that we had him and that he became the face of the passage of this bill that will take care of the victims of 9/11 illnesses for the next 70 years. We were blessed, thanks to the late Lou Alvarez.
Thank you for saying that, Shelley.
Thank you.